So Patrick Jankowski, if you don't know him, is the Senior Vice President of Research for the Greater Houston Partnership. He's a regional economist and Senior VP of Research at GHP. He oversees the research department, which provides data analysis, economic forecasting, and mapping functions for the partnership. We regularly rely on them. I was talking with Jeremy of BIC in front of the camera a second ago. Last year, one of our assists was with Shell Deer Park. Greater Houston Partnership provided the impact analysis of their big block turnaround, which happened last fall. So those are the types of things that we work closely with Patrick on. He is also president of the Houston Economics Club. He's a current board member of the National Association for Business Economics and a past board member for the Council for Community and Economic Research. He's been with the partnership for 33 years, 35 now, and has been married for, I think, longer than that or about the same time. So congratulations on both of those fronts. Help me welcome our speaker today, Patrick Jankowski.
I want to let you, Chad asked me to do this when I started preparing my slides. I went back and looked, and he asked me to make this presentation. It was January 6th when I got the email. I thought, oh, sure, I've got this taken care of. And then a lot has transpired between January 6th and today. And actually, I was going back and I actually was updating my slides at 2 o'clock today because of things which have been happening in the news. So let me go ahead and get started. That's my email address. If you would like a copy of my slides, I have no problem sharing them. I'll send you a PDF. Just go ahead and say that you're here at the presentation. Can you give me the slides that you presented on Thursday? Glad to get them out there. We figure it's good information. We want the community to have good information. So, get started. A couple of headlines. You might see the top headline, U.S.-China signs a Phase 1 trade deal. We also see that we signed an agreement, the USMCA. Brexit, the UK left the European Union, and you can look, Forbes everyone's reporting about the World Health Organization declaring the coronavirus a global health threat. It's interesting because all four of those events that I put up there have profound impacts on this region, and they all occurred within a 2-week period in January. All that stuff happened on a very short notice, and I'm going to go and talk about it one-on-one. Let's just talk a little about the U.S.-China trade deal. The trade deal was signed. You can see the benefits that the U.S. got to that was China agreed to purchase more agricultural products, more auto products, equipment, and energy. Actually, in the deal, it's very specific. China said they're going to purchase more than $50 billion worth of energy from the U.S. That includes crude, it includes refined products, it includes chemicals, and it includes coal as well. We have easier access to their financial markets. That's something the U.S. financial firms want to be able to do, is offer their services in China. And we have some protections for intellectual property. Not quite as rigid as I would have liked to have seen. In an ideal agreement, you have some sort of arbitration process set up where you take it to some sort of court of arbitration. The terms in the agreement is that if a U.S. firm thinks that they're being treated unfairly or something's been stolen, the U.S. trade representative will meet with the Chinese trade representative to iron out the details. So it's not quite as rigorous as we'd like, but at least we got an acknowledgement on China's part that there is some intellectual theft going on there. If you want to look at what did China get out of it, for one thing, it halted this thing getting any worse. It halted the escalation, and we did agree to reduce a few tariffs. If you think about the escalation was getting worse and worse and worse, and when President Trump announced this agreement, he announced it in early December, and we were just about ready to put another tariffs on another $150 billion worth of imports from China. At that point, virtually everything coming in from China would have had a tariff on it. So we halted that. We agreed to reduce some tariffs. But there's still some things to be negotiated. That's the role of state-owned enterprises. There are a lot of companies in China that are owned by the government, so they're not going to fail. The Chinese government's not going to let them fail, so it kind of puts them at an unfair advantage. There's also, China is still subsidizing a lot of export industries, which we feel puts U.S. firms at an unfair advantage. And we need to negotiate still some further tariff reductions, and that's kind of the leverage point from that. But what you're going to, the big takeaways are things aren't going to get any worse in our negotiations with China or the trade agreement. There's, I think, some consensus out there now that we should challenge China on a number of practices have had. a lot of people, the general public, didn't realize that when a U.S. firm had technology and they entered some sort of joint agreement with the Chinese, they had to turn over their technology to the Chinese as part of that joint venture. That's not going to happen anymore. And then there's a win from Trump going into the election. You will hear a lot about this on the campaign trail. You're going to hear President Trump saying, I challenged the Chinese, I stood up to them, and they gave in. So that's something that you're going to hear. If you want to get some idea why was this so important, China is our number 3 trading partner. Trade more with China than all the other countries that you can see up there other than Mexico and Brazil. China had been our number 2 trading partner. But because of the disputes between China and the U.S., we saw both exports and imports go down. And you can get some idea there of just by how much they went down. So hopefully we'll start to see a pickup in trade with China as a result of this agreement. And hopefully we'll see trade grow even more, which is very important for this region, especially for this part of the region. But we've got a wild card out there, and that is the coronavirus that continues to loom over everything. China agreed to purchase $200 billion worth of additional stuff from the U.S., and now there's a lot of discussion out there with the Chinese economy slowing down so much, they might not be able to hold up to that obligations. And we'll see if they go back to President Trump and say, we would like a little bit of a leeway on this. If you want to look, we signed the USMCA, U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, and that was signed on January 29th, just less than 2 weeks after we signed the agreement with China. It's the replacement for NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. If you remember, during the campaign trail, President Trump referred to this as being one of the worst trade deals in history. And President Trump said that if we do not get a renegotiated agreement with NAFTA, that he was just going to walk away from it. He was going to throw it out and we'll go back to the way things were prior to NAFTA. Well, we did negotiate a deal with China and Mexico. Some of the benefits out of that is we've got a higher North American content in automobiles. If any automobile made anywhere in North America has to have a larger number of components which originate from here. If you think about it, automobiles have an awful lot of plastics in it. And so I can see that as being something which benefits the region. We have greater access to Canadian dairy markets. I don't think that has much of an impact here in Houston. We have protections for digital commerce and e-commerce. If you think about it, when NAFTA was negotiated, that was back in 1993, signed in January 1994, e-commerce didn't exist. We didn't have the digital products that we have now. So that's some protections for that. And also, Mexico's going to have to adhere to some tougher environmental standards. There's been this concern that because Mexico didn't have to comply with the same sort of environmental regulations that the U.S. firms did, that Mexico had an unfair advantage. And what did Canada and Mexico get out of it? Well, once again, it's kind of eased some of the uncertainty. It stopped this escalation. There's not as much negative rhetoric as there had been earlier. Give you some idea why it's important. Mexico's our number 1 trading partner. We traded more with Mexico last year than any other country. Canada's our number 12 trading partner. So you can see just in 2 weeks we negotiated a deal that has an impact on our number 1, our number 3, and our number 12 trading partner. To give you some idea of what happened with trade with Mexico, you can see because of the uncertainty and because of the rhetoric, we saw trade with Mexico go down. A little bit because Mexico's economy is also struggling. The new president, who goes by the acronym AMLO, he's had some anti-business rhetoric, and you've seen some business development, business investment drop off. But hopefully we'll be able to offset some of it now that we have a trade agreement. But once again, you've got some concerns out there. You can see one of the things is maybe with the coronavirus, there's some talk out there that there's so many concerns with China now, we may start to see some of the supply chain move back to Mexico. And you can also see that maybe as a result of this, that the coronavirus, that maybe China won't play as big a role in global manufacturing as it has in the past. Let's talk about Brexit. The United Kingdom withdrew from the European Union on January 31st. Actually, what they withdrew from was the political union. They're still part of the trading union, and that's something which is under negotiations right now. They got out of the UK, the United Kingdom pulled out of the European Union because it had changed so much over time. When they first entered it back in 1974, they entered the European Economic Community, and it was simply a trading bloc. And the UK wanted to be part of that big trading bloc so they could sell more of their products in, and the continental economy was doing so much better. But over time it evolved to where it was a political union. And the citizens of the United Kingdom felt they had lost a lot of control over their own economy, their own destiny. Decisions were being made in Brussels that would affect the farmers in Scotland, and they had no control over that. So they figured they needed to get out so they could regain control over their own destiny, their own borders. The impact's still not quite fully to be determined, but I really expect that we're going to start seeing more trade with the UK and Houston, and actually see more investment from the UK into Houston and vice versa. It's important because the UK is our number 9 trading partner. So once again, within a period of 2 weeks, to repeat this, it deals with our number 1, our number 3, our number 12, and our number 9 trading, number 8. I'm looking at, it's a bit of a distance to see over there, so. But you can see how we've got all these deals there. Trade has already started to pick up between Houston and the UK. And we already had a Minister of Trade Policy visit Houston the week immediately after Brexit and start talking. We hosted them in the offices of the Great Houston Partnership, saying, what can we do to increase trade ties between the UK and Houston? So that's something. I talk all this about trade. One thing is, it's obvious it's very important for the port region. It's also important just for the broader economy for Houston, because over the last few years, if you think about it, the oil and gas industry started to struggle in early 2015, and it's never really recovered. And what's kept this economy afloat is our ties to the global economy and our ties to the U.S. economy. And those have been so important to us. And right now, there's a little bit of a challenge to both of those. And that gets to my next slide. That gets to the World Health Organization declare the coronavirus a public health emergency. I mean, all this occurred within a 2-week period. So did you see the headline last night? Maybe you've been listening to it. I'm having to read everything I possibly can. This came through my Twitter feed. I went to the Chronicle and their Fort Bend first coronavirus case in Houston, and I was driving here and I was listening to NPR, and they said it looks like there may be 2 cases in Harris County. So it looks like the coronavirus may be arriving here in the metropolitan area. Can you see that as well? I get up in the morning, I get my iPhone out, and I want to look at what's the latest on Bloomberg. The top line, coronavirus outbreak dominates everything. And that's pretty much, if I'd made this presentation closer to January 6th when Chad first asked me, it would have been a lot easier presentation to make. Because I could have talked about global trade, and now the coronavirus is pretty much, it's overriding everything. So this is the extent. I want to let you know this data, these numbers are actually coming from the World Health Organization. So these are the most official numbers you can get. You can see 93,000 cases worldwide, almost 13,000 outside of China. It's now in 76 countries. It's pretty much globally now. So far, just shy of 3,200 deaths as of yesterday, the World Trade Organization, 214 deaths outside of China. So I want to kind of put this in perspective where everyone's very concerned, and I need to let you know I am not a healthcare professional. I'm not an epidemiologist, but I am a researcher. I am an economist. I've gone and tried to dig up data, and so the Spanish influenza, which people have tried to compare this to, which was roughly 100 years ago at the end of the World War I, there were 500 million people, a third of the world's population came down with the Spanish influenza then. And there were, depending upon which estimate, between 20 and 50 million people died of the Spanish influenza. Just kind of and think, we've got much better health care, we've got much better, think about it, 100 years ago, a lot of people didn't even have running water. So we are better prepared for whatever comes along. We talk about SARS, and SARS, not nearly as many people got the SARS, the severe acute respiratory syndrome, and only 714 died, but that's a much higher mortality rate or fatality rate. That's a mortality rate of about 9.4%. So the odds of if you came down with SARS, the odds were 1 in 10 that you were likely to die from it. And then put that in perspective with the flu season, the last flu season. Last year, we were still in this year's flu season, 35 million people came down with it, 110,000 required hospitalization, and there were 61,000 deaths from the flu. And that's typical. Every year we don't realize that you get 50 to 60,000 people die from the flu every year. I'm not trying to minimize coronavirus, but I'm just trying to help you put it in perspective just how it is versus the common flu. So this is an interesting slide. I put this up here because the Asian Development Bank has done an awful lot of research into SARS and the impact it had on the economy. And there's a report out there, and they cite this survey that was done in Hong Kong at the height of the SARS outbreak. And then it said 26% of all the people who responded to that survey thought they were likely to come down with SARS. But in reality, less than 0.3% did. But that fear of roughly, let's say 1/4 of the population said, yeah, I'm going to come down with this, affected people's behavior. And there's a study out there done by the World Bank, and it says 90% of the impact, the economic impact of a pandemic is a result of the actions people take to avoid getting the disease, getting infected. And a lot of it is that social distancing. And this is another survey. Now, I'm going to have to turn around and look at this one. This was done by Coresight Research, and it did a survey on the internet, said, would you please respond to this, and said, if you're going to take actions to avoid getting the coronavirus, what are the sort of actions you're going to take? And you can look and see, avoiding shopping malls, avoiding sporting events, avoiding hospitals and schools and so forth. And if you think about it, that's probably going to be one of the biggest impacts that we have as a result of people avoiding public spaces, interacting with people. That's not to say there are not going to be other impacts, and I'm going to have to, there we go, this makes it easier. I have to go through advertising. Think about it. If Continental is pulling, not Continental, there we go, I've been here too long, United Airlines. If United Airlines is scaling back on flights, they're probably going to scale back on advertising. Auto leasing, I talked to someone with one of the rental companies, and he said because the oil companies are bringing fewer people in from overseas, they're not leasing as many cars, but they have a policy that if you go to a conference which is within 200 miles, we want you to drive there and not fly. So on one hand, they've lost the leasing of cars of people who are coming to Houston for training, but they're renting cars to people who are going to Dallas or going to Austin or San Antonio. They also said that they're all having to show proof of the protocols for how they handle the car when it's returned back in. You can look at that commodities. Everyone's probably seen what's happened to oil. Computer sales, if we have to work more from home, you can see more people either needing a computer or upgrading their computer. Consulting services. There's a lot of the consulting firms are being asked how do they deal with their supply chain issues. They're asking how do we deal with work at home policies? How do we handle if someone declares force majeure and says they won't be able to fulfill the contract? Construction is one thing you cannot do from home. So the workers are still going to have to come up to the work site. But construction materials, which are brought in from overseas, possible short supply. Talk to a guy who's worried about container availability. If we're not having imports coming in from China, the containers aren't arriving in the port. So how do you get the stuff back out that we're still making? Entertainment, people are not going to want to go out in public. Exploration budgets for the oil and gas companies. The capital markets had already closed up for the oil and gas companies. They were looking to see what they can fund through cash flow this year. We were already expecting exploration budgets to be down 10 to 15%. If oil prices have gone from 55 to 45, there's less cash flow, so there'll be less money for exploration. Exports, challenges there. Financial markets, everyone's probably seen, looked at their 401k and go, gosh, retirement seems to be even farther out now. Healthcare. On one hand, you think, well, the healthcare system is going to be overloaded. You're going to have people going to healthcare, but there's also an issue. What about all these people who are going to show up needing care who are uninsured, especially in this region where 1 in 5 people in the region are uninsured? The margins, with crude prices falling, the benefit that we have here on the Gulf Coast, because we don't overseas it's naphtha over here, it's what we can pull out of the natural gas stream. Margins are going to be pressed. Real estate, one of the firms I talked to said that because the travel restrictions, their foreign buyers who normally come in and look at their condos and their houses aren't coming in, they can't get in to try to show their products. Restaurants, it's people avoiding it. Supply chains, you've heard a lot about that. Traditional retail, right now there's a lot of toilet paper and paper towels and refried beans and ramen being sold. Shelves are running out. Transportation. Go back to the people are going to avoid airplanes, people are going to avoid public transportation. Someone said, well, they're just going to take Uber and Lyft, and I go, I don't know if I want to get in the backseat of a car that I don't know who was in there before and how healthy they were. Online retail may pick up. Streaming services, there'll probably a lot more Netflix movies being streamed. But this is, and then travel, this is the sort of things that will be impacted. Part of the challenge is Think about it. The World Health Organization declared this a global emergency on January 30th. That's only like 5 weeks ago. We don't have any data yet to see what's going on other than what you can see in the stock market or what you can see with oil prices. And when the next report comes out, or maybe the next two reports, they're going to be reporting January data. So even when we get the next set of data, and then February, we didn't really start seeing it affect the markets or the panic setting in until toward the ends of February. So to see the actual impact on the economy, we may not know for another month or two. But let me go on. You can see you can see what's happened with the Dow. I mean, yesterday it went up 4.5%. Today it's down 4%. That's a nice little chart for you right there. How about Sierra Week? It was a big conference that was supposed to be in town this week. That was canceled. You can look and see United's already starting to have to pull back. Coronavirus disrupting supply chains. Goldman Sachs thinks that there'll be zero earnings growth for companies this year. So we don't have the data yet, but we see lots of events and lots of anecdotes and lots of reports what's happening. So we'll see what actually shows up in the data. EIA oil demand, I put that was EIA, International Energy Agency, expected oil demand to fall for the first time in a decade this quarter, and that was roughly 2 weeks ago, February 14th, and this was yesterday. Actually, now it's the biggest fall, this IHS, the biggest fall in history they're expecting this quarter. So that's a lot of concern out there. I don't know how this is going to play out. There's so much uncertainty. I've got colleagues out there that are trying to model it, but we don't have good data yet. And all we can do is make lots of assumptions, and the problem is when you start making assumptions, if your assumptions are wrong, I'm hoping that this won't be as big an impact as we've seen, but you can see what's happened with oil prices right there. So, the big issues right now is the uncertainty, the misinformation that's out there, the fear that's out there, and that's what's driving lots of behaviors. That's what's driving lots of behaviors. And as a business community, you can mitigate risk, you can try to plan around risk, but you can't plan around uncertainty. And that fear is, well, that's the reason why the shelves are empty of hand sanitizer and so forth like that. So I do that because there are two places where if you want to get unbiased information on what's going on with the coronavirus, one was go to the World Health Organization, and they publish a situation report every day. And in the situation report, they will tell you exactly how many people have come down with it globally. They'll tell you exactly how many people have died, how many people in China and out of China, and they have a summary of bullet points of conclusions they've come to or insights they have, and sometimes the bullet points linked to other reports. And so this is a governmental agency, and so they, in theory, don't have an agenda, and so it's a great place for unbiased information. The other is, my organization has just launched a website where we're trying to aggregate resources, so if you want to know what's going on with the coronavirus, it's houston.org. You can just go to houston.org and use the search engine for coronavirus or go to business resources. But that's the challenge right now, is that the coronavirus is pretty much overlaying a lot of things that we see or we should be seeing in the economy, which gets me to that. Bit of a transition. This would have been my presentation if I had made it 2 weeks ago. And this is still valid, but this still needs to be filtered through the coronavirus. That's employment in the region. Employment in the region, in the 9-county region, has been doing pretty well. Each one of those bars represents total number of jobs that have been created in this region over the last 12 months. And you can look and see the left-hand side, you can see this dip in the middle, which was the fracking bust. You can go to the right-hand side, see where we are now. Now, if you go over here to this side, the bars on this side seem to be higher than the bars on that side. But this is healthier on this side because the bars on that side, the job growth on that side needed oil at $100 or more to sustain that job growth. Job growth on this side has been dependent upon oil at between 50 and 60. And so rather than creating jobs at the rate of 100,000 a year, we've been creating jobs at the rate of 50 or 60,000 a year. And that's more reasonable, that's more sustainable. If you want to look at what's been supporting that with the weakness in the oil and gas industry, part of it's been global U.S. growth. U.S. growth has been so strong up until now. And I'm a native Houstonian. Anybody else here a native Houstonian? Yeah, okay. Hate to admit it, we're part of the U.S., right? So by extension, when the U.S. does well, Houston does well. And you can see how well the U.S. has done, and that's helped Houston out. You can look when you hear about, 2.1% growth isn't that great. Well, you can look up there, 2.1% 8.1% annual growth. It's pretty close to the average. It's definitely the 20-year average. It may be different time periods you may see off a little bit, but it's still decent growth. We're pretty much, this term in statistics, reversion to the mean, we pretty much got back to the average where we should be growing. This one's a little different. This is employment. It's a little different than the Houston one I showed you. This is U.S. employment for each individual month. And you can see how strong U.S. job growth has been. Last month, we created 225,000 jobs in the U.S. Think about that two ways. There are 225,000 people who now have a job that the month before did not have a job. 225,000 people who are now collecting a paycheck. 225,000 people who now can go out and buy a car, who can rent an apartment, who can take a vacation, who can go out to the restaurant and so forth. So on the consumer side, this shows continued growth in the consumer side of the economy. On the business side, businesses wouldn't be hiring 225,000 people if they were worried about a significant slowdown. If they were worried that they would not have enough business to keep them busy, they hire them because they're looking at their growth, they're looking at their demand. Once again, though, we'll have to see how the coronavirus overlays this. But this is what's been supporting Houston's growth when we've had the weakness in the oil and gas. And that's a trade number right up there. You can see how growth was picking up in the global economy up until the outbreak of the coronavirus. And this is done by the International Monetary Fund, and this was actually their study that was released on January 20th, just 10 days before the WHO came out. The WHO sounds like a band. Before the World Health Organization came out and talked about the impact of that. And so all sorts of reports out there. People are trying to model this. Some say global recession, some say just flat, whatever. If it's just flat, that's not that bad, considering where we are. Probably we'll see maybe a whole point to half point shaved off this at least. And what's so important about the global economy is these are our exports. This is exports, and you can look and see that exports last year set an all-time high, record number of exports. And it's even when we had a feud going on with Mexico and a feud going on with China, we were still set a record for exports. So once we have these agreements in place, you would expect exports to pick up even more, which is the reason why it's so important to what we see going on in the global economy. And but once again, the coronavirus is kind of overlaying that. So talk about oil and gas, I could show you charts of oil prices and charts of rig counts and employment and so forth. I just thought I'd show you some headlines. The world's oil glut is worse than it looks. The world is facing its longest oil glut in at least 3 decades. The global economy is squeezing the shale industry. Oil prices drop, money dries up. That's part of that lack of capital. You can see stock prices sink. Oil sector cuts spending as Wall Street turns its back. Texas energy employment dips, layoffs come back to haunt. Now, a lot of headlines up there, but I want to preface that with, any baseball fans out there? Remember Yogi Berra? Yeah, he's a great player. And he has this famous quote, it's like déjà vu all over again. And the story behind that, he was sitting in the dugout and he watched Mickey Mantle hit a home run. And then right after that, Roger Maris hit a home run, back-to-back home runs. And a reporter came up and says, well, Yogi, what'd you think about that? And he goes, God, it was like déjà vu all over again. And I use that to introduce this concept because in the oil and gas industry, it's déjà vu all over again. Let me show you those headlines again. That top headline, as you can tell, was from 2019. The bottom one is from 2015. Top one is from 2016. The bottom one is from 2019. Top one is from 2016, the bottom one is from 2019. Seem like déjà vu? We've been here before? How about the top one from 2019, the bottom from 2015? Now, we forget sometimes, living in Houston, just how often it's déjà vu, how often we've been here before. That's why I put this chart up there. Hopefully you can see that. Since I started my career, this is my 6th downturn in the oil and gas industry. And before I retire, I know I'll go at least through one more, if not 2 more. And we kind of forget. So think about it. I started my career in the 80s, my 6th downturn. Anybody who started their career in the 90s, this is the 5th downturn. If you started your career at the beginning of the millennial, this is your 4th downturn, and so on. Anybody who started their career in 05, this is your 3rd. If you started it about 10 years ago, this is your 2nd. If you're just now out there in the workforce, well, welcome to Houston. You'll have these things happen in your career. So growth has been a little bit slower than we'd like to see in Houston. The oil and gas industry has actually been a little bit of a drag on the economy. But we were doing well because the global economy was doing well. We were doing well because the U.S. economy was doing well. But we're starting to see it in the numbers. You can see the downturn in vehicle sales. We had this nice, that bubble in the middle is that bump is the construction boom that we had a few years ago. We had that mini boom, and now it seems like we're trending down on construction. But this is an interesting one. This is sales tax collections. There are over 100 cities in this area that collect sales taxes. Rather than trying to collect data on all 100 cities, I just put the 12 biggest up there, which represent about 80% of all collections. And you can see how sales taxes go. That first dip, that's the Great Recession. That second dip, that was the fracking bust. We were trending down up until last month, and it really looked bad for this region because sales tax collections, both businesses and consumers pay sales taxes, and it looked like. But you can see we started to trend up. And you can look and see this one right here. This is the Purchasing Managers Index, also the PMI. And this is something that the Institute for Supply Management does. Every month they talk to the purchasing managers in the plants and the factories and so forth and ask them about sales, about backlogs, about inventory. And after asking those questions, they crunch all the numbers together and come up with this index. And it pretty well correlates when you see that whatever that red line is below that solid line, what color is it up there, that solid green line, that's a sign the economy is expanding and will continue to expand. And you can look over there and you can see the Great Recession. You can look and see the fracking bust, that one over that's just over, you can see Harvey in there, that real short dip. And you can see that we were trending downward. We were downward for 2 consecutive months, but the January numbers came in slightly positive. It'll be really interesting to see what happens when we get the February and March numbers. But it looked like things were starting to pick back up. And you see the economy was starting to grow a little bit faster until the coronavirus hit. And that's the big unknown. So we're actually forecasting about 42,300 jobs this year. Not quite as many as we'd like to see. In a good year, we'd like to see 60 to 70. You can see how it fits in. It's a little bit lower than we've had historically. But where's the growth going to come from? It's going to come from the usual suspects. It's going to come from healthcare. It's going to come from government, hotels, restaurants, bars, constructions. When I say government, that's not City Hall, that's not county commissioners, that's community college employees are considered government employees because they work in a state-funded organization. Employees, teachers of school districts are state-funded organizations or government-funded organizations. The same thing with university, school districts, and so forth. So as we see our population grow, as we continue to see increases in our youth, we're going to see growth in government. But you can see where the growth is going to be this year based on our forecast, even with the coronavirus. Areas that are going to be losing jobs are energy, and that's upstream energy, and retail. Retail still continues to struggle. So, and as I look at this, the 2020s, this next decade, to me, looks an awful lot like the 1990s. So we had a lot of problems in the 90s. Well, in the 90s, you can think about it, it was nice. We had the first President Bush. We had Walkmans. We tore down a wall. Seinfeld came on. But there are a lot of other similarities. And one of the issues that I'm looking at, though, is where are we going to grow, or how are we going to grow if upstream energy does not grow anymore? And that's a real possibility with the glut of oil, with all these, with the weak demand, with the move towards a low-carbon future. But you can see up there that top line was employment growth in this region in the 90s. The bottom line is oil prices. And you can see even in the 90s, we managed to grow, even with no help from the oil and gas industry, even with oil prices actually got below $20 a barrel at one time. And so what supported that growth? If we want Houston to grow in the 20s, can we look to the same sort of things that drove growth in the 1990s? Well, one of the reasons we grew in the 20s, even with no help from oil and gas, was the U.S. economy was doing well. You can see it up there. That's GDP. Now, those two red bars, that was the first Gulf War. That was the impact on the economy. And you can see what happened with trade. We really started to export very heavily. We became much more oriented to the global economy, which goes back to what I was saying earlier. We really need a strong U.S. economy and a strong global economy to help us out. And we got this guy right here. Anybody know what that is? That's the first laptop. So actually, no, that's a compact computer. That's those of us who had those, we referred to them as luggables. They weren't really laptops. And I put that up there because this represents a third element that we need in this economy to drive growth in the 20s. You might not realize this, but one time, Compaq was the largest private sector employer in the region. At one time, Compaq employed 17,000 people. And it wasn't just who Compaq employed, it was all the vendors and suppliers were here to support Compaq. Compaq went from an idea on the back of a napkin in a restaurant to being on the Fortune 500 list in 5 years. This was, in a nutshell, this was innovation. This was something very new and innovative, and that's something we need to be looking for in this economy. You may hear about, we have something called a Houston Exponential, where we're trying to bring in more technology firms, more software firms, more digital analytics. We're looking for those innovative companies that have the chance to grow like Compaq did. And if you think of the economy as a three-legged stool, well, right now it's a three-legged stool. You've got oil, you've got global economy, you've got the U.S. economy. We might need another leg to replace oil, and that would be innovation. Give you some idea of what happened in the 90s. We added over 500,000 jobs, and fewer than 1% of those came from oil and gas. I say that, we really shouldn't write off upstream energy just yet. It'll always be important to Houston. It'll always be something very important to Houston, but it won't drive growth the way it has driven growth in the past. But it's still going to be important. If you look at BP's forecast, they really don't expect the global demand for crude and liquids to peak for another 15 years. So there's still some runway left, but the thing is we have 15 years to figure out what's going to replace upstream energy if we start seeing lack of demand for it. So I'm getting towards the end. Let me kind of summarize. Short term, our challenges is coronavirus, how we're going to deal with that, how it's going to affect the economy. We also deal with this global slowdown. Long term, we do have an overbuilt real estate market. We also need to find how we're going to manage this transition. So which gets me to, I was trying to figure out how do I close this out, because I've talked an awful lot about coronavirus. And we're probably all, I know when I saw Brenda, we elbow bumped, we didn't shake hands. And they're talking about washing your hands and so forth. And my daughter, I've got a daughter who lives in Austin, and she sent me this, and I thought it was pretty funny. Wash your hands just like you've done slicing jalapenos and need to take your contacts out. So if you're looking for some, how long do you wash your hands, whether it's 2 happy birthdays or 20 seconds, just imagine if you were taking your contacts out after eating jalapenos. So with that, thank you very much. I appreciate your time and patience. And I'll turn it back over to you.